This is the Italian Real Estate Podcast, here to help you with the ins and outs and basics of Italian real estate, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Real Estate Podcast, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Of course, we are back at it again with Italian attorney Marco Permunian. How you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. And today we wanted to talk about getting around Italy. For those of you who may be moving to Italy, you might be thinking about how you want to get around, what you want to do. Do you need a car? Do you need to fly around? Do you need to this? Do you need to that? Like, what? How does this all work? And so we wanted to go over some of the modes of transportation and why you might want to be thinking about them or how you might want to be thinking about them. But I think maybe in this episode, just because especially for Americans, they're thinking, do I want to have a car? Can I have a car in Italy? Is it worthwhile having a car? And I know also you, Marco, enjoy getting around by car in Italy. Maybe that's a good place to start. And so probably let's start, while we're on your favorite topic, let's talk about my favorite aspect of your favorite topic. And that is the Autogrill. Let's just talk about this one little just staple of Italian life before we get into the nitty gritty. Marco, can you explain what an autogrill is?
I think this episode is going to be interesting for a lot of people. You know, just a very brief introduction. A lot of people who want to buy a property in Italy, they take into consideration where the property is or needs to be and how they can move around from there. And that's one of the questions that we're always asked. Okay, I buy this property here in this little village or in this big town. How can I move from place A to place B? Can you tell me, like, should I get a car? Can I go around by train? And how does the highway system works? So The transportation and how to get around in Italy, I think it's one of the most frequently asked questions from foreigners who wish to buy properties in Italy. And also I wanted to say that I know you have your own perspective because you lived in Italy and you became an Italian citizen through descent. And so I'm sure our audience will also be interested in seeing what your perspective is, not only my perspective, but going back to your question. So the highway system in Italy is, I think, very peculiar, and it's a system that a lot of foreigners do not expect. So first of all, you have to pay to use most of the highways in Italy, not all of them, but most of them. And by highway, I mean, you know, those big roads that connect one city to the other, and actually that basically go through the entire country, because we have highways that go from the north of Italy to the very south, and then from east to west. So we have a system of highways, and you have to pay to use them. And normally you use them for long distance trips. And by the way, this is a very Italian thing, because I've traveled in other European countries and you don't really pay for highways, but in Italy you do pay. But when you get to Italy, you see immediately how well kept they are. So like you can see why you pay to use them, because they're really well kept. And within these highways, you have these little bars / gas stations / resting area that you can stop, where you can stop and spend some time, and they're called Autogrill. And you know, there are in other European countries there are similar concepts, but I think the Italian ones are much different.
It's a step above the rest.
Yes, they're really nice. And so you'll find that there is like the gas station, which is very well kept, normally like good looking gas station. And right next to it, there is this huge store, which is a mixture, like it's something between a restaurant and a store that will sell things that you will find maybe in a shopping center, and as well as, you know, make food, but very good food. And there will be like the bar area where you can have breakfast and eat your cappuccino and orange juice. And the restaurants tend to be very good, like not the quality of the food is very good, and they're branded. So you see that the restaurant is sponsored by Bauli, for example, which is a very famous Italian company that makes panettone, and the store that you will find normally alongside the restaurant will sell very quality, not only food, but other Italian products. Maybe the price is not as cheap as it would be if you were buying the same products in a mall or in a shopping center outside of the highway. But I have to say, the quality of the food that they sell and the quality of the products that they sell, sometimes they sell clothing, sometimes they sell sunglasses, but it's a very good quality. And that's what I believe makes them impressive. Who would think that in an Italian highway you would find a very nice restaurant with a very nice store that sells like very good products.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a surprise because you think, oh, gas station food. This is like, you can't even compare it to like gas station food, because you can, in some of these, like, also to clarify one point is that a bar in Italy isn't necessarily what a bar would be in the US. A bar is like a coffee bar where you can go and have a coffee, or you can have a brioche or something like that, something sweet or something to drink, not necessarily alcoholic. But at these Autogrill, you can have like a sandwich, like a pretty decent sandwich. Sometimes there's some that are maybe a little bit nicer than others, but it's always something that you're not going to be disappointed by. I mean, you can get even like a very common thing in Italy, a cutlet sandwich, a chicken cutlet sandwich. And it's always, even the worst ones that I've had are still really enjoyable. And it can help to break up a little bit of a long trip. And not that in Italy you're going to have such long trips, but there are a lot of people who do like to get around from one major city to another, like these great distances, by car, just because unlike in the US, traveling by plane isn't necessarily as realistic. In some situations it makes more sense, but we'll talk about that in a second. But I think it makes sense while we're comparing getting from one city to another is the train system, because that's an alternative. And also for me, that was the system that I relied upon more so than having a car, or since I'm car free, since I haven't wanted a car, since I've been without a car for such a long time, by choice, I was very reliant on the train systems, and was very surprised to find out, for the most part, how reliable they can be. Of course, there can always be hiccups. Even actually the first time that I was coming down to Rovigo to meet in person, I had like a very long delay before being able to get there, which should have been only a few hours to get to Rovigo as a full day trip. But that's a different story for a different time. But Marco, what are some of the options that people have for getting around by train in Italy?
Just one final note before we talk about the trains, just because somebody was asking me last week, how do you pay for the highway? And like I said before, not all the highways are toll roads, meaning you have to pay for them, but most of them. And you'll find that before you access the highway, you'll find the toll booths where there are people sometimes that will take your payment. I mean, there used to be people more in the past. Now there's only one person. I think the rule is that there needs to be one person in case the system is malfunctioning, but otherwise there's an automated system where, well, you insert your money or you pay by credit card, or if you have it's a small device that you can purchase and put it in your car, normally connected to your bank account. And I think the cost is €1 per month, plus the cost of the actual highway. So calculated on the number of kilometers that you have used the highway for, it's called Telepass. And that allows you don't have to stop basically at the toll booth, and you just go straight, the gate will open, and you'll be able to access the highway automatically. And of course, this solution is normally for people who decide to live in Italy long term. Otherwise, there is no way, I believe, to buy this little device called Telepass if you're not a resident of Italy, if you don't have an Italian bank account. So if you are renting a car in Italy, you'll probably have to stop and pay before you're able to access the highway. But going back to the trains, that's another very good means of transport in Italy. I think some people have this idea where in Italy, the roads are not so good, or the trains are not so good or on time. But I have to say, lately, I've seen huge improvements in Italy, and trains. We have these high-speed trains that work really well. Maybe the regional trains, the one that you use for short trips, are not the best, even if they're being replaced. But slowly replaced. The government is slowly replacing the regional trains, which were very ugly until some years ago. But now I've seen some very beautiful regional trains, but especially the high-speed trains, they work really well. And I believe I've never seen so beautiful high-speed trains in the other countries that I've visited so far. It looks like you are on an airplane. There is like these beautiful seats and beautiful hallways. Everything is very modern. There is a bar inside, and they're really fast because they can get you from one major Italian city to another in just a very short time. I think you can go from Rome to Florence is just a couple of hours, even less than 2 hours, which is
I think
amazing.
Like an hour and a half or something.
Yes, of course, the tickets are not cheap when it comes to high-speed trains, but I think it's totally worth it.
Yeah, I would say actually the prices are fair for what they are, and sometimes you can be surprised about how low like the high-speed regional, because you have regional, high-speed regional, and then Freccia Bianca, Freccia Rossa, and then Italo. And even on the Italo trains, you have the two different classes on there, and the cheaper tickets are still very worthwhile, and they get you to the same place that the upper class ticket will get you, and it's still quite reasonable in both cases, and they're very comfortable in many cases. Even like what you were saying about feeling like you're on an airplane, like when you're on the Freccia Bianca or the Freccia Rossa, it's really amazing how just wonderful that they can be, especially if you get in the first class. Like you have a nice, great, large seat in some cases where you can lean back a little bit and relax and have your space. The regional trains, it will depend on where you are. Some of the older ones I'm not such a fan of, but they're still not even uncomfortable, I would say. It's still easy to have a ride on one of those trains. But then you have some of the more modern regional trains, and those can be very surprising as well, especially the regional trains in Alto Adige. Having lived there for a while, I can say that I had some very nice experiences, comfortable experiences on those regional trains, just getting from one city to the other up there. And the different systems in the country will charge you differently. I mean, specifically in Alto Adige, the more that you travel, the lower that your ticket costs throughout the year if you have like a refillable pass. So say at the beginning of the year, a ticket from Merano to Bolzano could cost you maybe like €5. But depending on how many kilometers you travel throughout the year, that price can come down to, I think, 90 cents or €1 or something. So it's kind of capped, roughly speaking, on the annual basis. But then even when you're traveling in other parts of Italy on the regular regional trains, the Trenitalia trains, it's still like very reasonably priced, that if you need to get from one city to another, that you can get refillable tickets or monthly passes that allow you to have that option to live in one city and work in another, especially depending on if you want to be in like a big city or if you want to maybe get out and live in a smaller town and not have the same hustle and bustle and pay the same prices that you would in a large city. But also even just another option if you are living in a city in Italy, some cities do have a metro system that is also very comfortable and very easy to use. Personally, one of my favorite systems, metro systems in Europe, is actually the one in Milan. I think it's wonderfully laid out. It's really easy to use. There's a couple stops that can get a little confusing if you're trying to transfer. But yeah, what do you think of the metro systems that you find like in Rome and Milan?
I think you just said it. The one in Milan, I've lived in Milan a long time ago, and I think it works really well. And the thing is, especially if you're living in Milan, you don't really need a car, and that applies also to other major cities where it might not be worthwhile to have a car, and it might just be better to use the public transportation system. Even if you have to go outside of the city, you could use the subway while you are in the city, and to move around in the city. There isn't just the subway. There are also other transportation means like buses or what is it called? The ones that
trams.
Exactly.
Yeah. Those are really nice in Milan. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And then, with the subway in Milan, you can also reach the airports, you can reach the train station. So if you live in Milan, you just use the subway to reach the train station. And from the train station, you can travel to another city. And the thing is, a lot of people that want to maybe purchase properties in Italy or want to move to Italy, they wonder, how can I rent a car? And sometimes that's not even necessary because the transportation system in Italy works really well. And there are some complications that you have to take into account when using a car. And using a car to move from one city to another might not be the best way to go because the public transportation system is indeed very efficient. And when using a car, you have to be very careful at speeding. You have to be very careful to restricted areas. And there are, a whole set of rules that you need to be, that you have to pay attention to when traveling by car, especially in Italy.
Yeah, and also, I mean, having a car in Italy can, like you were saying, make things more complicated. And even another option is for some of the airports, even in the major cities in the country. Not only would you maybe have a metro train to get there, but you also might have a regular train. I think for a couple of airports, I could be wrong, but also buses are very convenient. Even in Venice, you have buses that leave from the island itself that will drive you all the way to the airport. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about that you can take a bus from an island, but there's a highway that goes from the island to the mainland.
And you mentioned Venice, and that's a whole different world. You've been to Venice a few times. I remember you told me, and a lot of people ask me, okay, I'm flying into Italy and I want to rent a car and go to Venice. Just don't do that because in Venice, you can really go by car. I mean, there is a quite large parking space outside of the city. And then there is a bus that will take you to the city of Venice from the parking lot. The thing is, the parking is very expensive because there is such a limited amount of space. So it may just be easier to use the train, and the train station will get you inside the city of Venice. So you'll get out from the train and you will be already in front of the big canal. So, and in Venice, you can't, as I'm sure everybody knows, really drive by car. You can only drive by boat.
Right. Well, actually, even in Venice, like what a lot of people do, and I've done this before when trying to save a couple bucks, is that I didn't stay in Venice itself. Also, I didn't really want to, just because sometimes a little bit of hustle and bustle from the tourists, but I stayed in Mestre, just on the other side of the lagoon, on the mainland. I had a beautiful apartment there that I rented, that it was less than the cost of a room in Venice. And I mean, it was really cheap, like ridiculously cheap to go there, but it was big, beautiful, gorgeous place. And it was very close to a tram station. So what I ended up doing was taking a tram from Mestre into Venice. And that was, let's say, what, maximum 10 minutes or something to get from the mainland to the island. So I think it's a worthwhile possibility to consider if you are going to do that. But just to get back to something that I mentioned before about having the cars is that you have to take into consideration the ZTLs in Italy, these restricted traffic areas. Could you maybe explain a little bit more about that concept? We've talked about it and touched on it briefly in previous episodes, and the situation that you and I ran into in Rome one time. But maybe could you shed a little bit more light on these ZTLs?
Yeah, these are very common in the city centers, especially in major towns, but not only in major towns. I've seen them lately, even in some smaller villages. For example, when I went to the Lake Garda that I like very much, we went there and I was surprised to see that there were these restricted areas in these little villages with cameras. Wow. And the thing is, if you drive inside them, if you don't have a permit, which only residents would have, you will end up getting a fine. There are cameras and they will read your plate, and you will get through the mail a ticket that you have to pay, and that's completely in Italian, so that's a nightmare. Or if you rented a car, the car company will get it and they will charge your credit card. So you have to be very careful when driving in Italy, especially if you're driving through the city centers, no matter if it's a small town or a major city, which is why I said before, do consider the public transportation means, because you would avoid these problems that you would have when traveling by car in Italy. And I think these things are not common in other countries where you don't have to drive in certain areas and you can't access certain areas. There are cameras. They almost seem like they're there to trick you because you can go, but then there are the cameras and they read your plate and you get the ticket. So you don't know how to read the signs. I mean, there are signs that do say ZTL, which is the acronym for this restricted areas, but there is no gate or nothing that stops you. So if you are not careful or you can't read the sign, you just end up inside the ZTL.
Yeah, some of those ZTLs, like it will really creep up on you and you can just end up in it. And sometimes the signs are not all that large. They're just barely noticeable. But if someone were to accidentally drive into a ZTL, for example, and they didn't have one of these residential passes or permits to get in there, do you have a rough idea of what someone could expect to pay for that type of fine?
Well, as far as I could see, it's not a huge amount in general throughout Italy. So I'd say in the order of 80 euros, maybe to 100 euros, depending on the city, depending on the specific area. So it's not something huge.
Right. And then also actually something to consider is that in some cities, you can buy a day pass. They'll be sold at different locations, like even in Palermo at the train station, just outside of the ZTL zone. You can buy it, you activate it by phone or SMS, and you have to input your license plate number. And it's interesting, and that'll end up costing a lot less. But knowing that it exists or where to buy it, that's the tricky part.
Yeah, you know what? And while we are on the topic of paying tickets, and this is one of the other reasons why I would recommend not necessarily renting a car, but trying to choose the public transportation, is fines that you will get if you speed in the highway. The thing is, I've seen this system only in Italy so far. I haven't seen it in America, but there are systems in place in the Italian highways where there will be cameras in one point and cameras in another point that will see how long it takes to you to get from point A to point B. And if you got there too fast, it means that you were speeding, so you'll get a ticket. So not only you have to be careful to, like it happens in other countries, the police stopping you, or maybe police using a radar. But also, there are these automated systems when it makes it almost impossible for you to exceed the limits because you'll just get caught and you'll get a ticket.
Yeah.
So, and this is a very Italian system and something that you have to be very careful about when driving by car.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about that and that it exists. I can't think of really any other places. I mean, maybe one other country that I've ever heard of that has something like that, but it is interesting to see because, I mean, we'll say it's not uncommon that people do drive a little bit in a rush. It's not uncommon to see. I mean, even I have a friend who lives all the way up in the north of Italy, in the Alto Adige region, and he'll drive all the way down to Puglia, and to make it quickly, he'll rush and speed along the way. And I remember one time we were talking, I was like, dude, why are you even thinking about it? You're going to spend a whole day and driving fast, and it's going to be stressful and tiring. Why not just take a plane up? He's like, the tickets are cheaper than the flight. So I'm not recommending this. This is not an endorsement of breaking the law, just simply sharing a story of an experience that I once heard about from a friend, from their experience about what they decided to do. But actually, you know, with all that said, I think this is actually a great place to round out this episode. And regarding transportation in Italy, I think there's a lot more that we have that we can talk about. So keep an eye out for a part 2 to this episode. And maybe we'll also talk about getting to and from Italy, some international transportation as well. So anyway, Marco, if anybody is interested in moving to Italy, purchasing a home in Italy, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, italianrealestatelawyers.com, or give us a call. Our number is on the website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more content like this about purchasing your own property in Italy, renting, or where maybe to live in Italy, be sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel as well as the audio-only podcast. But of course, if you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, you are automatically subscribed to the Italian Citizenship podcast, where we talk about how to legally reside and move to Italy as well as get Italian citizenship. And also, if you're interested in any content about life abroad, living abroad as an Italian dual citizen expat, be sure to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia. You can also find the audio-only podcast, Not Your Average Globetrotter, on all your favorite podcasting players of choice. But of course, again, thank you to Mr. Marco Permunian from ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. This has been another episode of the Italian Real Estate Podcast. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.